Hey, greetings all. Thank you for joining our session today on achieving mission critical outcomes through private networks and connectivity. I'm Andrew Visser, and glad to have you here today. I lead business development with Expeto and have been with the company for about 4 years and in the space for over a dozen years. Excited to be here today with Jason Swanson, who I will let introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Jason Swanson. I take care of Avanad's managed services, sales, and solution support teams globally.
Great. Thanks, Jason. So starting off the session today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're seeing in the space that enterprises are having on a regular basis, and how the shift from mobile network operators and the connectivity they're providing into the private network space that we're seeing can be very challenging for enterprises, and kind of the process that we're seeing as the market's evolving. So one of the things that I have a significant amount of experience with and have a lot of conversations on daily are these challenges and the technical and operational elements that we're seeing as some of the key challenges that we're overcoming. So in the technical side of the house, enterprises have traditionally had very little control over their cellular deployments, which presents obvious challenges. And the controls that enterprises are really used to having with Wi-Fi or other non-standard based wireless are really not available through mobile operators today. So thinking about QoS and quality of service, data route control, and even encryption, if you think about Wi-Fi. And in my experience, this is leading toward enterprises categorizing devices in kind of cellular or not cellular for production deployments and environments. And if you think about the security aspect of this in particular, and being able to control the data, if the enterprise is not comfortable with their ability to control that, those devices simply may not get deployed, or they'll look for alternative means for connecting those devices. Another thing that we're seeing are costs and wide area coverage, and in the U.S. in particular, we're seeing a lot of utilities and other enterprises moving toward private radio networks, and I specifically say private radio networks and not a generic term like private LTE or 5G, due to the availability of CBRS and other spectrum options. We're really seeing an explosion in private radio networks, and we think about the ability to deploy those and the timelines associated. It can really take years or decades to achieve. And there's some Midwestern utilities in particular that have been exploring this as early adopters for a number of years, and it's taken several RFPs and a number of years then to get through the procurement process and achieve what they believe to be a production ready environment that is finally really starting to deploy. And so these private radio networks then are, of course, fantastic, and you're seeing a lot of momentum there. But it still begs the question of what happens to these devices when you think about your wide area network and ability to deploy outside of that footprint and still own the SIM and own the data path and apply your IT policy. And then finally, on the technical side, integrating your IT policy, so your encryption, your anomaly detection, your IP addressing, your general architecture, and typically piping that data from the public operators through an APN or a VPN has been a good option for security. But what we're seeing is a growing demand for IT professionals to really be able to actually architect their own network and apply it to their cellular deployments. And this also means integrating your cloud tooling and your applications that you're deploying and using in the field, and being able to build your data intelligence and use tools in the cloud to collect the data and architect the data and then actually act on that data. So on the operational side of this, then, I think that a lot of folks that are in attendance today have felt this pain and the technical challenges and how that relates to the operational side of this. But some relatively simple things, just like the sheer quantity of devices, managing those devices, and I mentioned the utility space, and I'll hit on it again. But we're seeing a multiplier of 3 to 5 cellular devices per household in the utility footprint, I think conservatively, and growing numbers. And then thinking about how those are getting deployed and the operational challenge of managing disparate networks, the GUIs associated, VPNs, and then trying to secure your devices and not create a cybersecurity disaster waiting to happen. Is a massive operational challenge for a lot of our customers and prospective customers and partners. And then creating a sound strategy on evolving your network, or thinking about it as your network from 3G through to 5G. What are the impacts for your business on the operational side? Also is a significant challenge if you don't own your network, which is part of the reason that we're here today. And then last and probably most importantly, thinking about the operational aspect of integrating your connectivity into your IT workflows, into your business processes, bonding your cellular connectivity with your IT. It's just something that has not really been available in the past and is beginning to become more available, and is a key reason you see partnerships like the one we have with Avanade, where you have application and IT integrators now bringing connectivity forward. This is maybe one of the biggest things to think about, in driving your digital transformation as an end company or end user, and beginning to contemplate really, how applications fit into your IT workflow on a daily basis, and how do you connect those things securely, and then make that a repeatable process. So when we take a step back and look at these challenges and the challenges we're facing here, the good news is that a lot of these challenges are coming about because people are embracing digital transformation, and a lot of people are doing that actively today and seeking out ways to become more efficient and create revenue streams. Other people are simply taking calls from vendors that are promising, efficiencies and new revenue. But one way or the other, these challenges are finding their way to the forefront of our space and IT department priorities. And so we're glad to be here today and talking about how we address this. So again, very simply put, next generation connectivity is making the impossible ordinary. And again, a lot of this is digitalization inside of telcos themselves, and the ability to begin offering great new tools to enterprises. And we believe that we're at a point now where, we can really begin to think about applications and IT workflows as a part of cellular connectivity, and cellular connectivity as a part of a digital, application-based offering, from hyperscalers and with hyperscalers. And just very quickly then, this is really the premise of the partnership with Avanade and Expedo in looking at application-based and Azure-based connectivity that is allowing our partners and our customers to really think about connectivity as something that takes place inside of and around Azure and their environments, and being able to really have an immense amount of control over those applications and endpoints in a way that is intuitive and is done out of the clouds. And now thinking about tools like ServiceNow and other IT tooling as ways to proactively monitor and control their endpoints. So I'd like to just give a real life example here in some work that we've done recently with a utility in the US, and how next generation connectivity has allowed them to really embrace digital transformation and begin moving toward connecting a significant number of assets and building what they would refer to as their virtual power plant. and doing it in a way that is standards based, that scales to millions of devices. And ultimately, as we're calling out on the title here, their mission by 2030 is to decarbonize by 80%, and that, in our opinion, is the absolute epitome of a mission critical enterprise outcome. And so we all know and have mentioned here that utilities are really scrambling to solidify their roadmap and strategy for decarbonizing to meet these self and government imposed goals. And this particular partner assessed the market and selected Expeto to accelerate their journey, and started doing that by focusing on standardizing their connectivity, so that as they are integrating networks and looking at an integrated connectivity platform that includes public, private, cellular, fiber, possibly low Earth orbit satellites going forward, they're able to standardize this and put this in a way that has the stamp of approval from internal stakeholders and allows them to really quickly move applications through a vetting process and to production. And so thinking about decarbonization as really their end outcome and goal, we're able to measure this in connected megawatts and the efficiency of their virtual power plant, and connecting megawatts and applications that are driving connectivity and efficiencies in their grid is allowing them to focus on the applications that get them there, the outcomes associated with those applications, and owning this standardized connectivity platform that's going to allow them to do things like ensuring uptime on EV chargers, keeping cars running, mitigating revenue leakage through chargers that are not connected, that consumers are able to connect to and fuel their cars. And so there's the aspect of connecting the megawatts here. There's also the aspect of directly owning all of the data that's coming off of all of these end connected devices and putting that into an organized and meaningful data architecture and collection that's allowing them to utilize their cloud and their cloud tools, their artificial intelligence, business intelligence, data intelligence, to really work on meaningful outcomes for their business and the path forward toward decarbonization and reaching these goals and even exceeding these goals in meeting the required carbon footprint allowance by the government. And I will hand it over to Jason to talk a little bit about the ecosystem required to accomplish this.
Thank you, Andrew. And so this is kind of where Avanade comes into the story here. So when you talked last, Andrew, about enabling mission critical business outcomes, that's really where we start with customers. We start with the use cases, the applications, the business drivers, and then we work backwards. And what we see is a lot of our clients and a lot of our the traditional folks that are focused mainly on just the network look at something like, okay, I just need to solve a network problem. And really, that's not what they're solving for. So what we see is the common use case around applications aren't working effectively, typically over poor Wi-Fi or some other thing. Think of a connected field worker scenario where you have an application that needs to run. Users are operating over, maybe it's a port or it's a very large logistics or shipping area. Today, the experience from that user tends to be, it can be poor. And so if you have device scanners or tablets or laptops, some might be on Wi-Fi, some might be on public mobile cellular, where that app resides, whether it's cloud, SaaS, all that stuff needs to be considered. So those are the types of things that clients are coming to us and saying, hey, my apps aren't working, things aren't going right. And so the value of what we can do together now is we're unlocking the possibility to enable the applications for the user, whether that's in the cloud or potentially refactor to work at edge. So if there are use cases where sometimes people want to be able to and they need to be able to operate standalone in terms of a location, those are now becoming possible. And what's been holding back a lot of these use cases has been the network. So for us to enable and then start to manage securely, and bring your cellular and Wi-Fi networks together so that you actually can operate those end to end in an enterprise IT way is super, super critical. And for us at Avanade, we see the partner ecosystem and the right partners that you need to enable this as a really critical differentiation factor um, moving forward.
Jason, if I could just jump in, we
Mm-hmm.
did have a question about what standardized connectivity means, and that could be really different for every enterprise customer in thinking about how they standardize their connectivity. But knowing that as new applications come about, that there is a process in place and there are standardized options, and maybe templatized is a good word to use as well, that that are the de facto means for putting new things onto your network. And so, in the case of work that we've all done together, that's typically going to mean you have a few options for connecting things, and you have a path that's built with partners that you trust. And if you're, for example, moving toward 6G connectivity next and planning for that, and you have business requirements around that, knowing that, in our case, and what we can speak to, that you have a provider in, for example, Microsoft, and you have partners inside of the Microsoft cloud ecosystem like Expedo that are enabling 2G through 5G today, and then we'll give you a software upgrade to 6G. That's really your path, and your plan and your standard. And there may be times that you need to deviate from that, but these partners will enable you to move from 4G with plastic SIM cards through to 6G with a totally virtualized experience. And the only hardware that you may be reliant on then could be the physical device or sensor or equipment in the field. So I appreciate that question coming through, and just wanted to address that. And we'll certainly take more questions as we go here. Please feel free to submit them, and we can try to answer these as we go. So thank you. Sorry, Jason, to interrupt.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna move to the next slide here in just a second, but I want to kind of build on that as I get to the next slide. 'Cause I think there's an important distinction in kind of the way you're talking about this. So classically, a lot of the cellular mobile communications networks um, have been segregated from IT, right? And so if we think about kind of standard connectivity, it can mean a lot of things, right? And what we're trying to talk about here, um, we're talking about how you bring that mobile connectivity more into the enterprise so that it can be managed more privately and more as an end-to-end stack. And what that does, a lot of folks today, like they're just solving for the network and they're not really thinking about, all right, well, what does that mean if I was to able to have a fully enterprise IT enabled cellular and private network, managing it with my security operations center, with my NOC, enabling use cases that I never thought were possible for tracking trucks and mines and manufacturing devices. And so I'm going to move to the next. That's why it's, from the way that an Avanade's looking at it, that's why I started with, we're looking at the apps and how we unlock the data and the use cases for people. And it's done by enabling, and bringing kind of what has been historically public mobile, cellular, into IT, and then being able to manage it like we manage cloud today, right? You like us probably have a 24/7 to type of operations center. We have monitoring tools that look at servers. Now we have monitoring tools that can look at RANs and radio networks and mobile cores, and as an extension of the cloud frameworks that we already have, allowing us to scale. We go a step further and we think about how this unlocks the potential for IoT and data analytics. We'll tell you a little bit about how we're connecting mines and the work that we've done at some of the mines to bring in pit data and worker safety information and volumes of data that are coming in. Those are the things that unlock companies' efficiencies and cost. And you can't do that. You're not being able to do that with Wi-Fi and LAN in certain cases, right? And so for us, there's two core components to bringing this network into the cloud, and then unlocking the power of what the cloud and the applications can bring. All right, there's one other kind of component to this, and it's a component that we'd like to talk to, which is Evolve. So one of the things with cloud and apps, things are completely not static anymore, so they change. And so one of the things, the way we deliver our services today, is that we still have the core operations and all the components that you would think about in terms of managing the networks, managing firewall security operations. But it's really important for you to think that these applications and the user features and the functions that people continually want to enable off the platform, whether it's a new quality check that's going down a manufacturing line, or it's just a user working on a supply chain application that needs a new feature. We constantly build that also into our service to make sure that there's the end user experience is continually evolving and upgrading as we go. Okay, Andrew, that's it for me.
Great. So I'm going to jump to a question that we received here. And the question is how are we dealing with private and public hybrid networks and managing the SIMs when they roam across this? And there are a number of entities out there that are claiming to do this or do this today, and some of them have a number of deployed or distributed assets or centralized termination points for their data. But this is really one of the areas where Expeto and Avanade shine. And the way that we've architected and handled this is by distributing our platform to where the data needs to terminate and treating this as a single wide area network. So we use a single SIM that we own. We use relationships that we own with the public operators, and we use appliances that we own for the private side of this as well. And so, there are a number of applications for this, and even the utility example that we called out is one where, they may have mobile assets that go into remote areas where they need to have coverage, and we'll do a private radio network perhaps on in those remote areas. And when somebody enters that area, they're able to seamlessly connect into that private coverage, which may run on an Azure box out at the edge. And they're able to use that private radio network while they're in that footprint and in that area, and then go back to the T-Mobile coverage that we provide as a part of our offering, where it's really still your core network, your network running inside of Azure, your IT policy, everything really being treated the same, but it's still a single wide area network running out of your cloud. And that's really how we view it is you should put your network where you need it and use it as you need to, as your business requirements drive, and treat it as a single wide area network that you drive.
Yeah. And Andrew, let me kind of, because I'm a little less technical probably than some of the audience as well. And so, one of the most powerful things about the Expeto platform, and it took me a while to kind of get this in my head, was that when we say private, we really mean private. And whether you are, we built our own private wireless network, or whether we're roaming on the public network, when we've got the Expeto software and SIM, it has an internal IP LAN address behind corporate firewalls. So it never leaves your corporate enterprise network, which is what also makes us managing it from an enterprise perspective possible. We don't have to deal with, you know, into mobile management software. I mean, you're still going to have that, but it's not going to be at the complexity that you had when you had something that was public and then something suddenly a device came back into your internal network, right? So think of this as like it's managing a desktop that's always in your office, or a mobile device that's always in your office.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. One of the examples that we can give that maybe segues into the next question that we've received on how do these networks take into account, enterprises that have remote areas, so like mining, or even utilities, and how does this fill the connectivity gap, or thinking about it as a digital divide, right, for those areas that don't have connectivity. And so going back to my earlier statement of put the network where you need it, some of the work that we've done takes into consideration that there is a lot of coverage in urban areas, or a lot of areas today, where you have public operators that have built and maintained radio networks, which is great. And so, we have done the legwork here to privatize data off of those public operators in a way that you treat it as if it's an extension of your IT environment. So it's your IP addressing and your security. And then in areas where it is remote, or where you do have a low latency use case where you want a private radio network, you're absolutely capable of deploying that in a way where you still maintain control of your network. The SIMs can traverse wherever you'd like them to go, whether it be the private or public or both. And you're able to operate your, again, wide area network the way that you see fit. So in mines, absolutely a great use case with autonomous haul and great efficiencies that can be realized there, and data collection. And it's certainly something that we would encourage people to look at if they're in that industry. Utilities, again, in areas where you're remote and you need to have a private network or a private radio network constructed, that's a great way to extend your network to collect the data you need and operate your business the way you see fit. But again, it's all a wide area network, and the outcomes are really what matter and what we're driving toward with our partners.
Yeah. So to be clear, Andrew, in places where there are public coverage, you can use public coverage if the latency and everything works for you. A remote mine needs some build out in most cases of some radio towers and fiber, but again, it's private. It can be private. It can be your stuff, and that could use CBRS spectrum, or it could use PAL or other types of spectrum to get that done.
Yeah, 100%. And something that we've experienced several times now is we have partners that don't know exactly what they're going to need, and so we'll typically start with a cloud deployment with us, and then through trial and error, understand where they may need private coverage built, or as they deploy use cases that have the lower latency requirements, may opt then to build the private network in those specific areas and migrate their applications there to have a better experience. Certainly something that we've seen several times now.
Yeah, and just a few minutes left. We got one more question in here. This one's a little trickier. Dual SIM endpoint device. SIM 1 public provider, SIM 2 private. Possible?
Yeah. Well, I think that we see that some, but really our solution abstracts the need for two SIMs, right? Because again, we're treating this as a single flat wide area network where your single SIM is going to be recognized by any of the deployments that you have. And so it becomes an IT policy of where you want that SIM to be able to connect. So it can connect to a single private radio network, many private radio networks, or your wide area network that's running across the private and public operators. So in that case, you really don't need a dual SIM. It becomes IT policy about where you want your devices to connect to, and you would set that inside of the portal that we would provide. So it's just IT policy at that point. There's really no need for multiple SIMs. So with that, I think that we are up on time. We really appreciate the folks that have attended, folks that have submitted questions. Jason and I are gladly available for follow-up on LinkedIn or email, however you'd like to reach out to us. And appreciate everybody attending. And thank you, Jason, for participating in the session with us today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, everybody.